Alright, we're going to finish this up. This is a fairly big novel I wrote, I don't know when, years ago, 15 years ago probably, called Dallas Pimiento. I wrote it in 4 different notebooks, and so therefore I decided to break the novel up into 4 books. And we've been reading from book 4, Bronco Fury. The first book was called Bronco. The second was I'm Bronco 2. The third one was Bronco Die Later. And the book 4 is Bronco Fury. And anyway, I'm going to finish this up. We begin with a piece called Waltz of Fashion. Barlog the barn owl, impervious to the efforts of most comedians, especially ethnic ones, lounged in the back of the mobile temple, listening to Grover Washington Jr. and constructing indifferent poems to the gods of rain, whose temple it was not. Berverb, the rain god, had his temple on the other side of town, hidden within a hollowed-out tree. "Why here?" asked Oasim, a collector of trash and a curious fellow of the bow-tie-wearing god. Why not in some glorious spot evocative of water?" "Because," answered Berverb, floating in a sitting posture a few inches above his bongo-shaped throne, "since the installation of the weather homogenizer, no one cares about the rain anymore." It was true, I suppose, but that still didn't fully explain Barlog the Barn Owl's indifferent poems. Since the poems remained unpublished until after his death, however, we have no information about what Barlog's intentions were. No one knew enough to ask him. The person who came closest was Oasim's brother, the banker Omar Abshafas. "You're not really a barn owl at all, are you?" he asked the poet one day at the mobile temple when he had come to throw a couple of coins into the yawning mouth of Phosmo, the god of inconclusiveness, whose temple this was. "No," admitted Barlog admitted. "I'm a human, the same as you." "I hope, sir," Abshafas snorted, "not the same as I." The banker looked regretfully at the mouth of the idol and made his exit. One of the poems that was published during Barlog's lifetime was recycling the theme. This was the work that brought fame and fortune enough that he needed no longer to sit at the temple of Phosmo all day selling his handcrafted totems of inconclusiveness to devotees. He bought a house in the tree next to that occupied by Verb. "Aren't you afraid that old hollow tree might fall down one day one night in a storm, possibly destroying your fine new home?" asked Leland Shrug, the successor to Barlog as the subject of this story. Barlog's answer, calculated to irritate Shrug as much as possible, did not surprise Shrug's nephew Lawrence when first he heard the anecdote. "I rather suspect he was a bit of an asshole," Lawrence told his uncle. Vile, spontaneous affirmation. "Your time is nearly up." The spectre in shades appeared before the mayor and spoke in sepulchral, admonitory tones. The mayor, caught off guard at his desk, recovered quickly enough for a man of his spiritual inclination, adjusted his tie, and made polite conversation with the spectre. "Time is up," he repeated musingly. "Up. Time is up." That's an idiom, isn't it? Because if you think about the words literally, how can time be up? We're using up to mean, well, gone. In substance. "I believe the derivation of the usage is from the phrase used up," the spectre commented haltingly, as if slightly nonplussed. "Probably." The mayor tapped his teeth with his pen as he had read that the late President Kennedy was wont to do. "Where did you hear that?" "Walt Whitman." The spectre pushed its shades further up the non-existent bridge of its non-existent nose. "Oh, I didn't know he wrote about the derivation of idioms." The mayor looked interested. "I have spoken to him in the limbo of timelessness," the spectre quickly replied. "Look, you're just trying to distract me." "To waste time?" the mayor interrupted with a laugh. Look, I've come and delivered my message. That's what I came for." The spectre tried to shake off the irritability that had settled on him. "And I thank you," the mayor nodded solemnly. "And another will come to fulfill its grim portents," the spectre in shades intoned ominously, holding up its spidery hands. The mayor stood up and came around the other side of his desk. "Why are you wearing those sunglasses?" he asked. "They're shades," the spectre replied, as in a shade. The mayor lowered his brows. "A shade," the spectre repeated. "A shade is a synonym for ghost." "Oh! I didn't know that," the mayor said. Or wait, maybe I did. I just didn't put it together. The Spectre sighed. Well, here it is anyway. He gestured at the window, through which came the bullet that took the mayor's life. A tile work in canister. Companions in despair, regret, and hard labor. Speke and I had not seen each other since the beginning of this book. Now, on the eve of its completion, I wandered into a theater where he was performing the title role in The Man Whom Destiny Screwed. I thought it was fantastic. I praised him in his performance afterwards. Well, thank you, he returned, standing in the tall boots that were such an important part of his wardrobe. Throughout the play, his character, Romeo Ledbetter, waded ankle and sometimes knee-deep in shit. How many more nights is this running, I asked. I'd like to bring Elsa to see it. Oh, tonight was the last night, Speke told me sadly, before turning to respond to the comments of his mother, who had approached him as well. Now that he's settled into his career, I thought, I can safely slip out to the denouement. What? No climax? I overheard someone in the crowd about me asking, as if in response to my thoughts. I had no answer to this. Fortunately, Speke's mother was there with an appropriate distraction. If you will only run around on the roof 4 times, she said, your wishes will be granted. I stepped back into the conversation before leaving. I'd say his wish has already been granted, I said, smiling, making it sound like a joke in case she rounded on me, which she did. You don't have the power to grant wishes, she rebuked. Not normally, I agree, but here, in this place, things are different. I held up my hands and looked around. What? The theater? She asked, confused. All the world's a stage, Speke quoted. I don't think that's adequate, I told him. There has to be an audience as well as a stage. Outside, I felt some of the old despair and regret. The hard labor was deferred for the moment. I hadn't communicated well. I had fallen back on cryptic pronouncements and veiled images. Where did he pad? The preceding story disappoints me. It is substandard. However, I felt that I owed the character Speke, who is based on a real-life person, a second appearance and an official farewell. This book evolved into a series of small, loosely interconnected stories in which character development, so beloved of critics, is non-existent. But in order to unify it, I have looked over the first 25 pages of the first volume, and now I'm all screwed up. It's hard to be both the writer and a participant in a book like this. Different parts of one's psyche keep intruding into each other's roles. I'm all screwed up, and I can't seem to get back into the proper frame of mind that will allow me to finish this last volume in the way it should be finished, a crazy bunch of little stories. But if anything, I am determined, so here goes. Falsifying documents in the portico of what passes for a hall of fame among the Zapwawi people of the Remoto Mountains, Mr. Minibands, his eyes obscured from passer-by by the wide, plunging rim of the hat he stole from Gaffy, sat on a chair so small that the Barbie dolls clutched in the arms of the little girls among the passers-by would have found it roomy. Obviously, I mean only one Barbie doll at a time, I explained to my captors, not all the Barbie dolls at once. Enough! The gruffest of my captors insisted, and thrusting the barrel of his pistol at me. Tell us more about the documents he is falsifying. But then that's one of the disadvantages of our language, I continued, lying on my back all tied up with heavy rope in the back of my captor's truck as a light rain fell. I won't say all languages because unfortunately I only know one, but the disadvantage, I mean, is one of imprecision. This is your last chance, growled one of the nicer captors, now becoming a little nastier. What are those documents the Mr. Minibands are falsifying? I sighed. Well, if you must know, I believe they are some of my stories. Your stories? Said a third captor, glancing across the street where the portico of the Hall of Fame was. I thought you told us you were a painter. Can't a man be both? I asked. Not and have a career, he can't, Mr. Minibands shouted. Gun float gospel warble. The sleeping puppy knew no more French than the little girl in whose lap he lay, yet he had no trouble crossing the border into the micro-principality of Fuiwu. As far as I could tell, he merely sat whimpering while the little girl shook her head dumbly as the border patrol questioned her. I don't think that will work with us, do you? I asked Mills, the puppet on my left hand, after recounting the scene above. I doubt it, Mills returned, seeing as how that was a movie, Dallas. Yes, Fuiwu is real, I pointed out. Mills carried a guitar, perhaps to compensate for the fact that I could not play the guitar myself while he was in place. He turned to the window. "We'll see," he said simply. I opened my Tales of Woe journal and began flipping through it, chuckling at all the adventures I had had. As I neared the middle of the book, however, I grew confused. I didn't remember any of the more recent entries. A giant sock that swallowed churches, a two-headed man debating the existence of capitalism with people living a funeral, camels emerging from a spaceship on two legs. "Have you been messing about with this?" I asked Mills, but he didn't answer. He had fallen asleep, his head against the window. "Yesterday's entry is the most bizarre of all," I continued, indifferent, I suppose, to whether anyone heard me or whether I was even communicating in the strict definition of the word. I don't know why, but it was often easier to understand my own thoughts if I spoke them aloud. The Border Patrol questioned me in some language I assumed was French. "I have no idea what you're saying," I smiled and said. They rummaged through my possessions. "This is fooey-woo, isn't it?" I asked. The main patrolman among the 4 or 5 in the cubicle with me repeated the word "fooey-woo" and nodded, pointing, oddly enough, at the ceiling. I began to get a little nervous when they removed Mills from my hand and sniffed suspiciously at his interior. Everything turned out well, however. One of the patrolmen opened one of my collections of cartoons and began laughing aloud. He showed it to his comrades, who also laughed. How to wear your badge proudly. Under investigation for more than 8 years now, the Thorpes yet enjoyed the complete confidence of the spiral-backed tuna and its cohort of mates. "All except when Linda," whispered the spiral-backed tuna in as much of a whisper as it could manage. "She thinks you two are nothing but a pair of liars." He winked with most of the eyes on the left side of his head. Thorpe 1 was tempted to wink back, but Thorpe 2, reading of his inclination in the crude, extremely limited edition newspaper they printed for their own benefit, discouraged this with the simplest of gestures, a mere touch of his own forefinger to the wrist of his fellow Thorpe. "So, when will there be a Thorpe 3? the spiral-backed tuna asked. He always asked that. I explained in my footnote. It was usually a sign that the bulk of the conversation was over, and that matters should be ended with a private, recurring joke. In a politely worded but generally negative review of commentaries on the Bronco, Gorville asked, "How does Dallas Pimiento know that the spiral-backed tuna always asked, 'When will there be a Thorpe 3? Was he there? Did he habitually observe the interactions of the tuna and the Thorpes?" I knew, because one of the spiral-backed tuna's mates was a former pupil of mine who sent me a kind letter many years later expressing thanks to me for having been such an inspiration. Included in the letter was a passing reference to the conversational conventions of the tuna when interacting with the Thorpes. It is as simple as that. "When will there be a Thorpe 3? asked Thorpe 2 immediately after the Thorpes had returned to their heavily scrutinized domicile. "Let's find out." Thorpe 1, shockingly perhaps, was amenable, pleasant, and obliging in the face of this brutal onslaught of demands and suspicion. He led the way into the production chamber where, slowly developing in a waxed cardboard box, was some kind of vaguely organic structure that might, with a little license and a powerful sedative, be called Thorpe-ish. "I'd say," speculated Thorpe 1, rattling the box, "another 9 to 10 years. "Oh, Fleshkin," Thorpe 2 used the affectionate term the two Thorpes used on each other. "I'm sorry I was cross with you." Born during the big change. Asterisks next to Jed's name on his bag boy's union card indicated that he had no last name. As he worked spearmint oil into his hands after a day's work at the Shopping Delight on Crab Funk Road, Jed discussed his situation with Digby Nance, a union sympathizer from the Cola League. "I'm waiting until I can think of a really good name to add it to the one I've got," he spoke awkwardly. His tongue was twice as thick as it needed to be, while his tiny blocked nose did not help matters. "What about Bagger?" Nance suggested. He and Jed were alone in the filthy break room at Shopping Delight. "My mom suggested that as well." Jed toweled off his hands on some newspapers. "But I don't know. I think I'd rather have something a little more—" "Wait a minute," Nance interrupted. "Your mom?" Jed looked at Nance. "Yeah?" he said curiously. "You have a mother? Doesn't everybody? I assumed you were an orphan or something. Why don't you just use your mother's last name?" Nance was not a good-looking man, and he screwed his face up as he was doing now. "What do you mean?" Jed looked equally confused. Before Nance could explain what should be so obvious, but often isn't, 3 men entered the break room. They were pushing a large crate on the dolly. "Excuse us, gentlemen," demanded the one who seemed to be doing the least amount of pushing. "We need to push this table back." Nance got up from his chair while Jed asked, "What's this?" "Ice machine," the man who had spoken previously answered. "Donated to the employees of this store by Vance Willow." He sounded as if he were making an official pronouncement. "You remember him, don't you? Tall kid with blonde hair?" "Must have been before my time," Jed said. "What?" the man asked. "Must have been before my time," Jed repeated with an emphasis on clarity. "I can't understand a word he says," the man looked at Nance. "Nor can I," Nance sighed. Flashing October's pumpkin belly. A page from the Hoot Owl Register found its way into Manfred's copy of Body and Element. In his deranged state, following the ingestion of some flavored smoke at a meeting with his spiritual advisor, he saw no incongruity in moving from one of the proper pages to the interloper. In fact, at the point of crossover, the juxtaposition of the words beak and finger had a profound effect on his psyche. "Beak finger," he said aloud, as if having discovered the secret of the ages and remembered something of vital importance. Several of his fellow passengers on the Transworld Millipede looked at him askance. And is there anything one can do askance besides just look? But Manfred gave no thought to whether or not they understood the fountain-shattering nature of this new concept. "Beak finger," he repeated, clutching the corrupted book before him as if it were a space-age medicine that some naked primitives were wary of taking. A little boy smiled at him. Manfred caught sight of him as he stepped into the aisle. "Beak finger," he said passionately into the boy's face, which immediately changed from delighted to frightened. "Remember it, child," Manfred enthused. "It's the central fact of all human interdimensionality." He then hurried up the aisle towards the cockpit. "What did he say to you, Jeswick?" the boy's grandfather asked. "He said, 'Remember it, child. It's the central fact of all human interdimensionality,'" the boy told his grandfather as he stared at the madman striding away. "What does that mean?" "It doesn't mean anything," growled the old man. "It's crazy talk." The boy, however, did not cast aside the memory of his encounter so readily. He kept the word beak finger deep inside him for years, until the time came that he was ready to form a band. He opened his heart and gave his band his wonderful, evocative name. What a curious shock, then, to find as his band rose in strength that the name was also the name of the key concept of the religious movement that Manfred had founded. "We could be New Big Finger," suggested the band's bass player. Ghost Affliction fan mail. Surprised as she must have been by the sudden appearance of an impact crater on top of her TV, Gamma Ray wasn't going to allow herself to show any reaction. She certainly wasn't going to stop watching TV. "I don't think I want to sit in here," Gordon said edgily. "Why not?" Gamma Ray asked. She didn't mind talking. A commercial for a used car dealership was on at the moment. The instant the show came back on, however, all conversation must cease. "You've got meteorites falling in here." Gordon stared at the hole in the ceiling through which the object had entered. "Oh, you noticed that?" Gamma Ray was intrigued. She hadn't expected her new friend to notice anything outside the TV screen while images moved about on it. No one else she knew besides herself had the ability to watch TV and see the TV at the same time. "Of course Gordon began. "It's back on." Gamma Ray, named after the method by which David Banner had been changed into the Hulk by her TV-loving father, announced quietly. With one more glance at the ceiling, Gordon joined his would-be girlfriend in watching House of Fascism. The show concerned the repeated attempts by the main characters, Rod Screw and Thelma Hotass, to escape from the titular house, which wasn't really a house at all, but an abandoned underground storage facility for 70s-era contraband. On the current episode, the two had nearly made it into the elevator shaft that they supposed led to the upper levels when Rod, coming across a crate of powerful pornography, had been seized by uncontrollable desires and insisted on a quick bout of love with Thelma. During their act of bestial primacy, they had been caught by Dr. Shiftenplass, one of the three faction leaders, vying for supremacy over the House of Fascism. Gamma Ray heard a noise from Gordon. She shushed him as politely as her distracted attention allowed. When the next commercial came, however, she found him dead with a hole in his head. Before the grieving process could even begin, her daughter came in the room. "Mom," the girl whined, "there's a problem with the TV in my room." The master stabilizes his crops. "Would you please pass the ketchup?" Hudson, an exact replica of Paul Stanley, only with short hair and a beard, asked the sailor across the table, obliging with a grunt. The sailor, a woman with a prosthetic arm, silently measured up this Hudson character, whom she knew by repute. He was said to have hunted with sweet-faced internals in the transitional zone between this world of video games and bulk rate correspondence in the plenitude of water-rich worlds beyond. She watched furtively as Hudson drew a frowny face on his ground beef sandwich. What could she say to him? Something friendly, but not tending to inspire romantic ideas. While her brain cooked up something, Hudson was joined by another man, this one looking identical to Gene Simmons, except for having short hair and a beard. The sailor could not help overhearing their conversation. "What's that you're eating?" asked the newcomer. "This is called a hamburger," Hudson replied. "You enjoy ubiquity, don't you?" "Let's just say I don't reject something just because it's universally popular." Hudson's voice was nothing like Paul Stanley's. A blind man hearing his voice would cry, "Lumberjack!" unhesitatingly. "I quite agree," the sailor woman interjected, gesturing with the knife she ate with. Hudson and his interlocutor stared at her a moment before the latter asked, "And you are?" "Kate Kennard," she replied, extending her hand, not to the demon look-alike, but first to Hudson. After shaking hands with him, she shook with the other man, repeating, "Kate Kennard." "Good to meet you, Kate Kennard. I'm Hooper." "This is Hudson." "I know you," Kate said to Hudson. "I mean, I've heard of you." "But not me?" Hooper was mockingly indignant. "I'm sorry." Kate spared a glance for Hooper, but turned back to Hudson. "I've heard about your hunts in the transitional zone," she said. "Have you now?" Hudson smiled and turned to Hooper. "I was with you the whole time," Hooper cried. "And look who gets the renown." The story of the end. The end began, sensibly enough, with the deployment of the heavier units, elephants, electric refuse crews, hair vendors, and so forth, along the wire fence through which the quick gelatin was deemed most likely to escape. Old Fudlap, whose property bordered the controversial site, invited many of his out-of-town relatives to watch the festivities from his front porch, or, in the case of some of the younger ones, the old tree house in the backyard. "This is fun, isn't it?" Glopson demanded to know that his cousins shared his feelings as he ascended the ladder to the tree house with a plastic bag of cookies hanging from his oversized lower incisors. "The other kids at school call him Sabretooth," Enid complained to her sister. The two sat chatting in the kitchen as the men carried television, stereo equipment, and bags of second-hand clothing into the house. Enid's sister watched Enid closely. There were definite signs about the earlobes and transphenoidal ligaments that she was losing the battle with Mother Nature. They heard Fudlap give a cheer from outside. One of the boys came rushing in. "Granddaddy says they're getting near the middle of the end," she shrieked. Everyone came pouring out onto the porch. Even Lester, who fancies himself a bit above his kin, followed along. In his head, however, he sneered. "How can you be at the middle of the end?" he thought. "The end is the end. It's not a definite section unto itself, with its own sections, beginning, middle, and end. The end doesn't have an end." He was so occupied with puzzling out this conundrum that he did not take in the significance of what was happening out on the site of the end's unfolding. To the collective gasp of the observers, an immense orange ball, like a beach ball, commented little Karen, rolled forward, splashing through the quick gelatin like so much oil-tainted water in a parking lot puddle. 10,000 archers, each wearing upon his magnificent head a gleaming silver helmet, drew their bows as one. "Aunt Lou," little Karen asked in a horror-struck voice, "I just had a terrible thought." "What is it, darling?" Aunt Lou moved her cigarette to the other side of her mouth. "Well, if that's the end happening out there, when does it happen and is finished? Does that mean that will be the end of us too?" "Oh, darling," coughed Aunt Lou. Her coughing continued, but she never finished her